Eleanor Whitmore pressed the torn letter to her chest and forced down the sob climbing her throat. They had called her worthless again, a spinster too clever to be loved, too old to be wanted. Yet that night in a ballroom crowded with the most powerful men in Virginia, 7 foreign contracts lay on the table and not a single soul could read them. Not even the richest man in the state. Only she could. If you love a story where a rejected woman rises, subscribe and stay to the very end and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. Eleanor Whitmore folded the letter twice, then a third time, until it was small enough to hide inside her glove. Her hands did not shake. She had trained them not to. "Read it again," her aunt whispered beside her. "Read it again and tell me I misheard him." "You did not mishear him, Aunt Margaret. He said the debt comes due at the end of the month." Eleanor kept her eyes on the crowd. "He said if we cannot pay the house on Willow Lane belongs to the bank and to Edward Aldermore, who holds the note." "Edward?" Margaret said the name like something spat from the mouth. "That man." "That man," Eleanor agreed quietly. Around them the Whitmore estate blazed with candlelight and laughter. Not their estate. It had not been a Whitmore house in years. It belonged now to the canal men, the investors, the plantation owners who had come from Richmond and Charleston, and as far north as Boston, to celebrate the largest waterway project the state had ever attempted. Eleanor and her aunt stood among them, like 2 shadows who had wandered in from a colder room. "You should not have come," Margaret said. "I was invited." "You were invited to be looked at. There is a difference." Eleanor almost smiled. Her aunt had never learned to soften a truth, and Eleanor had stopped wishing she would. A woman in blue silk passed close by, glanced at Eleanor's plain gray dress, and leaned to the woman beside her. "That's the Whitmore girl," she said, not troubling to lower her voice. "The educated one. The one Aldermore left. Left her at the altar near enough. Said he couldn't abide a wife who corrected his Latin." A laugh light as a fan snapping open. "Imagine. A woman near 30 reads 7 tongues, and not one man will have her." "Well, what use is a woman who reads?" They drifted on. Eleanor watched them go, and felt the old heat rise in her cheeks, and then, as she always did, she pressed it flat. She had a great deal of practice pressing things flat. "Eleanor." Margaret's hand found her wrist. "We can leave. There is nothing for us here but their amusement." "There is supper," Eleanor said. "And I have not eaten a proper supper in 9 days. Let them laugh. A laughing man does not watch his own plate." Margaret stared at her. "You frighten me sometimes, child." "I frighten everyone eventually. It is my one reliable gift." That was when the noise changed. It was not a loud change. Nobody screamed. But a ripple went through the far end of the ballroom, near the great table where the men of business had gathered, and the ripple carried a particular sound Eleanor had learned to recognize in a lifetime spent at the edges of powerful rooms, the sound of money frightened. "Something's wrong," she murmured. "How can you tell?" "Because the fiddlers stopped and no one asked them to." She was already moving. Margaret hissed her name, but Eleanor threaded between the guests toward the long table, drawn the way she was always drawn toward trouble that involved paper. A knot of men stood over a spread of documents. At their center was one man taller than the rest, broad through the shoulders, in a black coat with no ornament on it at all. He was perhaps 34, with a hard jaw and harder eyes, and he stood very still while the men around him grew louder, which told Eleanor at once that he was the one who mattered. Loud men are afraid. Still men are the ones with the most to lose. "Where is Delacroix?" the still man said. His voice was low and did not rise, and yet the others quieted for it. "I hired him at considerable expense. He was to be here at 8. It is now past 10. "Gone, Mr. Harrington?" another man said. "His room at the inn is emptied. Bag and boots. He left before noon." Harrington. So that was Nathaniel Harrington. Eleanor had heard the name 100 times in a week, the wealthiest canal investor in Virginia, a former army officer, the man whose signature could move 1,000 acres and pay the wages of half the county. She had pictured someone older, someone softer around the middle, the way rich men often went. This man looked as though he had been carved out of the same wood as the table. "Then we are finished," said a heavy man with a florid face. "Harrington, I'll speak plain. The northern investors will not put down $1 on contracts no one can read. They ride out in the morning. They will not ride out. They will if by morning we cannot tell them what they're signing. These papers came from Delacroix's own agents in New Orleans, and Baltimore French, German, Portuguese, the Lord knows what else. He was the only man in 3 counties who could read the cursed things, and now he's vanished and the contracts must be countersigned at the meeting in 5 days or the whole project." The man drew a finger across his throat. "Gone. And you, Harrington, will have staked the Harrington name and a great deal else on a thing that fell apart in a ballroom. For one moment, no longer than a breath." Something crossed Nathaniel Harrington's face. Not fear. Eleanor had seen fear all her life, and this was not it. It was closer to the look of a man who has heard a name he does not wish to hear. Then it was gone, and his jaw set, and he said, "Bring me every translator in Richmond." "There is no time to bring a man from Richmond." "Then bring me one from anywhere. I do not care what he costs." "There is no one, Nathaniel." This from a woman's voice. A young woman had stepped up beside him, dark-haired, sharp-eyed, in a green gown. His sister by the resemblance. "You've asked everyone in this room. Half of them can barely read English." "Constance." "I'm only saying the truth, brother, and someone in this family ought to." The florid man threw up his hands. "Then it is finished, and I'll not stand here to watch it." Eleanor had heard enough. She would ask herself later why she did it. She would tell herself it was the mention of the wages, hundreds of workers who would go unpaid, and she knew better than most in that room what it was to count coins that were not there. She would tell herself it was the sabotage she had already begun to smell, because a hired man does not vanish the very day the contracts arrive unless someone has paid him to vanish. She would tell herself many things, but the truth, the plain truth she admitted to no one, was that she was tired. Tired of pressing everything flat. Tired of standing at the edge of rooms full of men who could not do a thing she had done since she was 15 years old. So Eleanor Whitmore stepped forward into the light. "May I see them?" The men turned. For a moment, none of them seemed to understand that a woman in a gray dress had spoken. "I beg your pardon," said the florid man. "The contracts." Eleanor held out one bare hand. She had left her gloves off, she realized, and did not put them on. "May I see them?" A laugh went round the group. Not cruel quite. Worse, indulgent. "Ma'am," the florid man said, "these are business documents, in 7 languages." "I know. I heard you count them from across the room." "They are not—" He searched for the word. "They are not needlework, ma'am." "No," Eleanor agreed. "I should think needlework a great deal harder. I have never managed a straight hem in my life." Constance Harrington made a sound that might have been a laugh quickly swallowed. Nathaniel Harrington had not laughed. He was looking at Eleanor now, truly looking the way a man looks at a rifle. He is deciding whether to trust, and she felt the weight of that look, and did not flinch from it. "You are the Whitmore woman," he said. "I am." "Aldermore's. His former betrothed. Yes, I find the whole county is very well acquainted with that fact, so we need not dwell on it." She kept her hand out. "The contracts, Mr. Harrington." "Nathaniel," Constance murmured. "She reads. Everyone knows she reads. Half the reason they mock her." "I do not deal in half reasons," he said. "And I do not deal in parlor tricks. Miss Whitmore, I mean no discourtesy." "You mean a great deal of it," Eleanor said, "but I've grown a thick hide, so proceed." The room had gone quiet around them. Guests were drifting closer, scenting a spectacle. And Eleanor understood with the cold clarity that came to her at such moments exactly what she was risking. If she was wrong, if the languages had shifted, if her father's old dictionaries had misled her, if she stumbled over a single word, every soul in this room would carry the story home. The spinster who thought she could read the men's papers. It would follow her to her grave. It would follow the last name of a family already 3 generations fallen. But if she was right, "I will make you a wager, Mr. Harrington," she said. His brow lifted very slightly. "I am not a wagering man." "No. You are a careful one. I can see that in the way you stand." She took a step closer to the table. "So here is a careful wager. Let me read you the first line of any one of those 7 contracts. Not translate it, read it aloud in its own tongue, and then tell you its meaning. If I am wrong, I will walk out that door, and you may all go on laughing, and I promise you will never see my face in a Virginia ballroom again." A pause. She let it hang. "If I am right, you will hear me out. That is all. You will simply listen." Silence. "That is a poor wager for you," Nathaniel said slowly. "You risk your name. I risk only a moment of my time. Your name is already on those contracts, sir. I'd say we each have something at the table." For a long moment, he did not move. Then he reached down, took up the topmost document, and held it out to her. "Read it," he said. Eleanor took the paper. Her fingers were steady. She had made certain of that. It was written in a dense, slanting hand, and she recognized it before she recognized a single word. Recognized the shape of it. The particular way the writer looped his descenders, and something in her chest went very cold and very still, the way a pond goes still just before the ice. But she said nothing of that. Not yet. "This one is French," she said. "New Orleans French, not Paris. You can tell by the shipping terms they use the old river measures." She read the first line aloud, the syllables rolling smooth off her tongue, and though not one man in that room could follow the words, they could all hear that the words were hers, that they came out of her like water from a spring and not like a schoolgirl sounding out letters. She lowered the paper. "It says," she told him, "the undersigned agrees to transfer full title of the Western Tract, being 4,000 acres along the Harrington Cut, to the account of the holder upon completion." She looked up. "Do you know what that means, Mr. Harrington?" "It means the land transfers when the canal is done. That is the agreement." "No." Eleanor set this paper down flat on the table and pressed one finger to a line near the bottom. "It means the land transfers to the holder. Not to you. Not to the investors. To whoever holds this note when the work is complete. And a note, sir, can be sold, bought, passed hand to hand like a card in a game. The way this is written, a man could buy up your paper quietly, wait until your workers have dug every foot of that canal with their own backs, and then hold 4,000 acres in his fist and pay you nothing." The florid man had gone very pale. That cannot be right. Delacroix read us the terms. He said the land came to the syndicate." "Then Delacroix lied to you," Eleanor said. "Or he was told to, because this does not say what he told you it says. Not one word of it." The room had stopped pretending not to listen. Nathaniel Harrington reached out and took the contract back from her. He did not look at it. He could not read it. They both knew that, but he held it as though the paper itself had wronged him. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and his voice had changed. The dismissal had gone out of it. What was left was harder to name. "You said you would read one line." "I did. Read the rest." "Nathaniel," Constance began. "Read the rest," he said again, not to his sister, to Eleanor, and now his eyes did not leave her. "All 7, every line, whatever it costs and however long it takes. I will clear this room if I have to." Eleanor looked at the 7 documents spread across the table, and she thought of the debt due at the end of the month, and the house on Willow Lane, and Edward Aldermore's name on the note, and she understood with the awful precision that was her curse and her only weapon, that she had walked forward, not into a rescue, but into a war. "That," she said quietly, "will take considerably longer than an evening. And I do not read for free, Mr. Harrington. I've been reading for free my whole life, and it has bought me exactly nothing but a torn dress and a laughing town. If you want the rest, you will pay me, properly, like a man." Behind her someone gasped. A woman did not say like a man to Nathaniel Harrington. A woman did not say much of anything to him at all. Constance Harrington laughed out loud, and Nathaniel, for the first time that night, almost very nearly smiled. "Name your price," he said. "Not here. Not in front of an audience who came to watch me fall." Eleanor drew her gloves from her sleeve and began slowly to put them on. "Send a man to Willow Lane tomorrow. The gray house with the broken gate. Everyone knows it. We will speak like people of business, and I will tell you what I've found, and you will decide whether it's worth the trouble of a spinster." She fastened the last button. "Good evening, Mr. Harrington." She turned to go. "Miss Whitmore?" She stopped. "How did you know?" he asked. "The land clause. Delacroix hid it in the 7th line of a contract in a language no one here can read. How did you know to look for it?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because I know the hand that wrote it." And she walked out of the ballroom past the women in silk and the men with their frightened money, past her aunt, who scrambled to follow out into the summer dark, and she did not let herself tremble until the doors had closed behind her, and no one living could see. Aunt Margaret did not stop talking the whole way home. "You could have ruined us. You could have ruined what's left of us, standing up in front of Nathaniel Harrington and every powerful man from here to Boston. Eleanor, are you listening to me?" "I'm listening." "Like a man. You said like a man to him. He heard worse in the army, I expect. He is not in the army now. He is the richest." "Eleanor, stop walking so fast, my ankle." Eleanor slowed. She took her aunt's arm gentler than her voice had been and matched her steps to the older woman's in the dark. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the ankle." "Not for the rest?" "No, not for the rest." They walked. The night was warm and full of insects, and the road home was long and rutted, and neither of them had thought to bring a lantern because lanterns cost oil and oil cost money. "You knew the hand," Margaret said at last quietly. The anger drained out of her. "That's what you told him. You knew the hand that wrote those papers." Eleanor did not answer. "Eleanor." "I knew it," Eleanor said. "Whose?" She did not want to say it. Saying it made it real, and once a thing was real, she had to act on it, and she was so tired. "Edward's," she said. "The clerk's letters are Edward's clerk. I'd know that man's descenders in the dark. Barrow. Thomas Barrow. He kept Edward's ledgers for 6 years, and he wrote out every fair copy of every document Edward ever put his name to." She stopped in the road. "And I know something else, Aunt. I know it because I spent 2 years of my life copying French shipping terms into a ledger for a man who told me my mind was the finest thing about me, right up until the week he decided a fine mind was an embarrassment in a wife." Margaret's hand tightened on her arm. "The contracts Harrington's holding," Eleanor said, "the ones meant to steal 4,000 acres, and the wages of hundreds of men, half the phrasing in them is mine. It's my old work. The measures, the transfer clauses, the way the New Orleans terms are set down. Edward kept my papers when he threw me over. He kept everything I ever wrote for him." She laughed, but there was no laughter in it. "He couldn't abide a clever wife. But he had no trouble at all keeping a clever wife's work and selling it for a fortune." "Then you must tell Harrington. In the morning. You must tell him everything." "Must I?" "Eleanor, if I tell Nathaniel Harrington that the fraud he's caught in was built on documents I helped write, what do you suppose he'll believe?" Eleanor's voice was steady, terribly steady. "That I'm a woman wronged, come to save him out of the goodness of my heart. Or that I'm Edward Aldermore's cast-off, in on the scheme from the start, come to worm my way into a rich man's confidence." She started walking again. "Edward will say the second. He'll say it loud, and he'll say it with lawyers, and half the county already believes any low thing about me they're told. That's what he does, Aunt. He doesn't fight with fists, he fights with reputation. He's spent 6 years making certain that if it ever came to my word against his, no one alive would take mine." They reached the broken gate of the gray house on Willow Lane. Eleanor stood with her hand on the cold iron and did not open it. "There's the debt," Margaret said softly. "End of the month. If we don't pay, Edward takes the house." "I know. And now Harrington's offered you money. Real money, Eleanor. Enough to pay the note. Enough to keep the roof over us." Margaret searched her niece's face in the dark. "You could take it. You could translate his papers, pay Edward off, and never say a word about whose hand wrote them. Keep your head down. Keep us safe." For a long moment, Eleanor said nothing. The safe thing, the quiet thing, the flat, pressed-down thing she had done her whole life. Take the money, hold her tongue, let Edward keep his good name and his stolen fortune, and be grateful for the crumbs of it that fell her way. "I could," she said. "But you won't." "No." Eleanor pushed the gate open. It shrieked on its hinge. "I won't, because if I take his money and stay silent, then Edward wins twice. He steals the land, and he keeps me small. And I have been small Aunt Margaret for a very long time, and I find I've run clean out of room to get any smaller." The man came to Willow Lane at 9 the next morning. Eleanor had expected a clerk. Some junior fellow with a satchel sent to haggle and report back. She had put on her second-best dress, her only other dress, and set out the last of the good tea. The tea they saved for illness and funerals, because a person of business received callers with tea, and Eleanor had decided that whatever else she had not lost that. But it was not a clerk who ducked under the low doorway of the gray house. It was Nathaniel Harrington himself. He filled the little parlor the way a horse fills a hen coop. He held his hat in his hands. He had taken it off at the door, Eleanor noted, without being asked, and that told her something too. And he looked around the shabby room with its faded paper and its one good chair, and whatever he thought of it, he kept off his face. "Miss Whitmore." "Mr. Harrington." Eleanor did not rise from her chair, and she saw him mark that, and she saw him decide not to be offended by it. "I confess, I expected an underling." "I sent no underling." "So I see. Sit if you can find the room. My aunt is upstairs with a headache that I suspect is her way of leaving us to it. Tea." "Thank you, no." "Sit anyway." He sat. The good chair groaned under him. He set his hat on his knee and looked at her across the little table, and for a moment neither of them spoke, and Eleanor understood that he had come himself for a reason, and that he was a man unused to explaining his reasons, and that she would do well to let him find his own way to them. "You did not sleep," she said instead. He blinked. "Miss, you did not sleep. It's in your eyes, and in the fact that you're here at 9 in the morning instead of sending a man at a civilized hour. You went home last night, and you sat up with those 7 contracts you cannot read, and you tried to make sense of a thing built precisely so that men like you cannot make sense of it. And now you've come to the one person who told you the truth of it, and you don't much like that the one person is me." She folded her hands. "Have I got the shape of it?" Nathaniel Harrington was silent for a long moment. "You have a discourteous way of being correct," he said. "So I'm told. Frequently. It's why no one will marry me." She said it lightly before he could taking the weapon out of his hand, before he thought to reach for it. "Now, you've come. So let us not pretend. You want to know whether you can trust me. That's the whole of it. You've a fraud around your neck the size of a millstone, and the only person who can untangle it is a woman the whole county calls bitter and strange, who happens inconveniently to be the jilted lover of the very man you're beginning to suspect." His hand tightened on the brim of his hat. "You suspect him too," she said. "Aldermore. You've suspected him since before I stepped forward last night. That's the look that crossed your face when the wages came up. I saw it. You heard his name in your mind before I ever spoke it. You see a great deal, Miss Whitmore. It's the only thing I've ever been permitted to do, so I've gotten good at it." Nathaniel looked down at his hat, and then slowly he set it aside on the little table, as though putting down something he no longer needed to hold. "My brother," he said. Eleanor waited. "I had a brother, younger. Wide open, that boy trusted everything, everyone. He went to the war and I did not stop him, though I could have. I was already made by then. I could have bought his way clear of it, and I told myself it would shame him, and the truth is, I didn't want the argument." He said it flatly, the way a man reports a debt. "He died at Bladensburg, 19 years old, and I have spent the years since making very certain that I am never again caught unready, that no man ever again does a thing to me or mine that I did not see coming." He looked up. "And last night, Miss Whitmore, in front of every man of consequence in Virginia, I was caught unready, by a Frenchman's slanting hand, and a clause I could not read. And it was a spinster in a gray dress who saw it, and I did not. It was Eleanor understood as close to an apology as this man had given anyone in a very long time. "You want to know if I'm in it with him?" she said gently. "With Edward. That's the fear. That I helped Delacroix disappear, that I've come to play the wounded innocent, that I'll lead you deeper into the trap, wearing the face of the woman who saved you." "Yes," he said. Just that. No softening. She respected him for it. "Then I'll tell you the truth, and you may do with it what you like." Eleanor leaned forward. "The reason I knew where to look in that contract is that I've written 100 like it. Not for you. For him. For Edward Aldermore. Before he threw me over, I spent 2 years as the mind behind his ledgers, reading his foreign correspondence, drafting his terms, translating every letter that came off a French or Portuguese ship into words a Virginia court would honor. He courted me for my mind, Mr. Harrington, and then he married my mind to his fortune, and left the rest of me at the altar. And when he cast me out, he kept every page I ever wrote." Nathaniel had gone very still. "The phrasing in your 7th contract," Eleanor said, "is mine. The transfer clause that hands your 4,000 acres to whoever holds the note. I wrote a version of that clause 4 years ago for a shipping deal of Edward's, and I was proud of it. God forgive me, because it was clever, and no one had ever let me be clever before." Her voice did not shake, though she willed it to be steady with her whole body. "He took my cleverness, and he turned it into a knife, and now that knife is at your throat, and you are sitting in my parlor, asking whether I helped him hold it." She spread her hands. "So, there is your reason not to trust me. I've handed it to you myself. You may walk out that door and hire whatever fool from Richmond you can find, and I won't blame you, and I'll pay my own debts some other way or lose the house trying." Silence in the little parlor. Nathaniel Harrington looked at her for a long time, longer than was comfortable. She made herself hold his gaze and not look away, because she had learned that the moment a person looks away is the moment the watching man decides they have something to hide. "Why tell me?" he said at last. "You could have kept it. Read my contracts, taken my money, said nothing of your history with the man. I'd never have known your hand was in it. Why hand me the one fact that damns you?" "Because you'd have found it," Eleanor said. "Not the phrasing, you can't read the phrasing, but you'd have found the history. This is a small county and a long memory, and Edward Aldermore has spent 6 years telling everyone who'll listen exactly the kind of woman I am. The moment you're seen paying me, he'll come to you, and he'll be sweet as pie, and he'll say, 'Harrington, do you know who you've hired? Do you know that woman was mine? Do you know she'd say anything, do anything to see me ruined?' And every word he says will be a lie, built on a true fact, which is the only kind of lie worth telling. And if you first hear that fact from him, you'll believe him. But if you hear it first from me, mice, then when he says it, it's old news," Nathaniel finished slowly. "And a thing already confessed cannot be used to accuse. You learn quickly for a man who claims not to wager." Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite respect. Recognition, perhaps one careful person marking another. "That was not the play of a woman in league with a fraud," he said. "No," Eleanor agreed. "It was the play of a woman who has spent her whole life being underestimated and has grown very, very good at knowing what a man will believe." Nathaniel Harrington sat back. The good chair groaned again, and then he did something Eleanor had not expected. He reached into his coat, drew out a folded paper, and set it on the table between them. "My man of law drew this up at dawn," he said. "I told you I sleep poorly. It is a contract of employment between the Harrington estate and Miss Eleanor Whitmore, translator and interpreter, engaged to render into English the full and true meaning of the syndicate's foreign documents and to advise on their remedy. It carries wages. Real wages, Miss Whitmore. Not charity and not a favor and not a debt you'll owe me after. A wage a man would be paid because the work is a man's work and better done than a man could do it." Eleanor looked at the paper. She did not touch it. "There's a figure at the bottom," she said. "I can read it upside down. It's more than I've held in 5 years. It's what the work is worth. I don't insult people I intend to rely on. And if I take it and Edward comes to you with his lies dressed as facts, then I'll remember who told me the truth first in her own parlor when it cost her to tell it." He pushed the paper an inch closer. "I'm not a trusting man, Miss Whitmore. My brother trusted and it killed him. But I'm a man who can tell the difference between a person protecting herself and a person deceiving me. And last night and this morning I have watched you do nothing but the first. Take the position, save your house, and help me hang the man who's trying to steal from 400 workers who dug my canal with their bare hands." Eleanor Whitmore looked at the contract for a long moment, and then she thought of every room she had ever stood at the edge of, every laugh at her back, every man who had told her that a woman's mind was a curiosity, a party trick, a thing to be borrowed and returned soiled. She thought of Edward's clerk's slanting hand and her own clever claws turned into a blade, and the house on Willow Lane with its broken gate, and her aunt upstairs with a headache that was really just fear. She thought, "He is offering me a wage and a war in the same page." And then she thought, "Good. I have been ready for a war my whole life, and no one ever let me fight one." She picked up the pen. "You should know before I sign," she said, dipping it, "that this will not stay a matter of contracts. Edward Aldermore did not build this fraud to steal one man's land. A man does not vanish his own translator and forge a syndicate's papers for 4,000 acres. He does it for control of the canal, of the county, of every deal that will ever cross this water once it's dug. You're not the target, Mr. Harrington. You're only the door he's chosen to walk through." Nathaniel Harrington watched her poise the pen above his contract. "Then I'm glad," he said quietly, "that I found a woman who knows how the door is built." Eleanor Whitmore signed her name. She signed it in a full, clear hand, every letter of it, the whole name that a town had spent 6 years trying to make small. Eleanor Margaret Whitmore. And when she set the pen down, she felt something that she had not felt in longer than she could remember. Not hope. She was too old and too clever for hope. But the cold, clean, dangerous feeling of a woman who has finally been handed the one thing she was always good for, and means to use it to burn a liar to the ground. "Well then, Mr. Harrington," she said, and there was iron in it now, and the beginning of something that in another woman might have been a smile. "We've a great deal of reading to do." The reading began at Harrington Estate 3 days later, and by the end of the first hour, Eleanor knew that Edward Aldermore had not built a fraud. He had built a labyrinth. "Read that one again," Nathaniel said. "I've read it twice." "Read it a third time. I want to be certain I understood you." Eleanor set down the German document and picked up the Portuguese one instead. "You understood me perfectly. You simply don't want it to be true." She scanned the lines. "The Baltimore shipping clause routes every barrel of stone through a single depot before it reaches your canal. One depot. Owned, if I read the ownership clause right, and I do by a company whose name is written here in Portuguese, precisely so no man at your table would ever trouble to trace it. And who owns the company? That, Eleanor said, is written in the German one, which is why he wrote them in 2 languages. A clause in one document is a clause. A clause split across 2 documents in 2 tongues is a rope with the knot hidden." She laid the 2 papers side by side and pressed her finger from one to the other. "Here, and here. Read together they say the depot company may raise its fees at will without limit, and that your syndicate is bound to pay whatever it charges or forfeit the contract entirely. He's not stealing your land, Mr. Harrington. Not yet. He's building a throat around your canal, and once the water flows he means to squeeze it." Nathaniel stood very still by the window. He had a way of going still that Eleanor was learning to read. It was not calm. It was the opposite of calm. It was a man holding a great deal of fury behind a very small door. 400 men, he said, digging a canal that will make Edward Aldermore rich no matter whether it ruins me. Worse than that, it will make him rich by ruining you. The more your costs climb, the more he collects. He's designed a thing that profits from your failure. That's the cleverness of it. That's... Eleanor stopped. That's mine, she said quietly. That structure. Profit from failure. I built the bones of it 4 years ago for a marine insurance scheme. It was meant to protect honest shippers. He's turned it inside out. Nathaniel turned from the window. You keep saying that the work is yours. Because it is. Then prove it. Eleanor looked up sharply. Not to me, he said. I believe you. I've watched you read for 3 days. I could no more doubt you than doubt my own hands. I mean, prove it to a court. To a room. Because a thing you and I know in this study is worth nothing when Aldermore stands up in front of the county and calls you a liar. If this work is yours, Miss Whitmore, then somewhere there is proof it's yours and we will need it before this is done. And that was the first moment Eleanor understood that Nathaniel Harrington was not merely going to use her. He was going to fight beside her. It unsettled her more than any insult had. My father's papers, she said slowly. He taught me. Every method I have, every clause I learned copying his manuscripts. And when I drafted for Edward, I drafted in my father's style because it was the only style I knew. If the phrasing in Edward's fraud matches my father's manuscripts, and my father died before Edward ever set eyes on a canal, then the origin of the method predates Aldermore entirely, Nathaniel finished. And no court could believe he taught it to you. Where are the manuscripts? Eleanor's face changed. Miss Whitmore, Edward has them, she said, or had them. When he threw me over my father's library was already promised against a debt my father died owing money most scholars do, and Edward bought the debt. He bought my father's life's work out from under me at auction and had it carted to his own house before my father was cold in the ground. He said it was an act of charity. He said he was preserving a great man's legacy. Her voice had gone flat and terrible. He was preserving the evidence. He knew even then that he would want my methods and would not want the proof they were mine. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then softly, he has thought about this for a long time. Longer than I have. That's what frightens me. Every move I make he made first in his mind years ago. I'm reading a game he finished planning before I knew we were playing. A knock came at the study door. It was Constance Harrington, and she did not wait to be admitted. There's a man in the yard, she said. Come on horseback asking for Miss Whitmore by name. He says he's from Aldermore. Eleanor and Nathaniel looked at each other. Already, Nathaniel said. I told you he moves first. Eleanor rose. What's the man's name? He wouldn't give it, but he's got a satchel and he keeps touching it like it's got teeth. Barrow, Eleanor said. Thomas Barrow, the clerk. The very hand that wrote your fraud, Mr. Harrington, is standing in your yard. She smoothed her skirt. How convenient. He's come to me. Edwards sent his own forger to my door, and I cannot for the life of me think why unless... She stopped. Her mind moved. Nathaniel watched it move. He had come to find the watching almost unbearable, the speed of it. Unless Barrow's come to warn me, or to buy me, which means Edward's afraid, which means we've frightened him already, and we've done nothing yet but read. How could he know you've read anything? He can't. Not for certain. But a guilty man assumes the worst always because he judges the world by himself. Eleanor started for the door, then paused and turned back. Mr. Harrington, whatever this man says in that yard, I need you to say nothing. Let him speak to me. Let him think you're a rich fool who's hired a curiosity. If he believes you don't understand what he's brought, he'll show more of his hand than he means to. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. A man like him did not enjoy playing the fool. You want me to stand there and look stupid? I want you to stand there and look rich, Eleanor said. It's very nearly the same thing to a man like Barrow, and far easier to bear. Constance laughed. Nathaniel did not, but something in his eyes conceded the point, and he followed Eleanor down through the house and out into the yard where the clerk was waiting. Thomas Barrow was a narrow man with ink-stained fingers and a nervous sideways way of standing as though he expected to be struck and had decided to be ready. When he saw Eleanor, his face did a complicated thing, relief and dread together. Miss Whitmore. He pulled off his hat. You remember me. I remember your handwriting better than your face, Mr. Barrow, but yes, I remember you. He flinched at that. He knew what she meant. She'd let him know she knew in the first sentence, and she watched the knowledge land. "I've come—" He glanced at Nathaniel, at Constance, at the tall house behind them. "I've come with a message. From Mr. Aldermore. He wishes—" Barrow swallowed. "He wishes to extend his congratulations on your new position." "Does he? And to say that he holds no ill will. That the past is the past, and that—" The clerk's hands worked at the brim of his hat. "And that if Miss Whitmore should find in the course of her work any documents that seem irregular, she might do well to bring them to him first, as one who knows the syndicate's affairs, before troubling Mr. Harrington with matters a lady might misread." The word hung in the summer air. Misread. Eleanor let it hang. She'd learned long ago that silence made men fill the space with their own mistakes. "He offers a consideration," Barrow added quieter into that silence, "for your trouble, a generous one. He knows the house on Willow Lane carries a note. He would see the note forgiven, entirely, in exchange for discretion." Behind Eleanor, she heard Nathaniel shift his weight. She prayed he'd hold his tongue. "Let me be certain I understand you, Mr. Barrow," Eleanor said, and her voice was pleasant, terribly pleasant. "Edward Aldermore is offering to forgive the debt on my aunt's house, the same debt he bought precisely, so he'd have a rope around my throat in exchange for my silence about a fraud he assumes I've already found. Have I got the shape of it?" Barrow went gray. "I'm Miss Whitmore. I said nothing of fraud. No, you said irregular, and misread, and you offered a great deal of money to a poor woman to keep her from speaking to her employer. A man doesn't buy silence about nothing, Mr. Barrow. He only pays for the words that would cost him." Eleanor took one step closer, and the narrow clerk actually stepped back. "You wrote them, didn't you? The contracts. That slanting hand, I've watched it fill 6 years of Edward's ledgers. You copied out every forgery in that stack. And now he's sent you to buy me because he couldn't come himself. Because if he came himself, I'd see his face and know I was right. But he forgot something. Edward always forgets it. He forgot that I know your hand as well as I know my own. You didn't just carry the message, Mr. Barrow. You are the evidence." The clerk's mouth opened and shut. His eyes darted to Nathaniel, to the rich fool who was supposed to understand none of this, and found Nathaniel Harrington looking at him with the flat, patient attention of a man who understood every word. I only wrote what I was told." Barrow's composure broke all at once like a dam giving. "I have a family. Miss Whitmore, I have 3 children, and he pays my wage, and a man does what he's told, or he doesn't eat. You of all people ought to know what it is to—" "To be used," Eleanor said. "Yes, I know exactly what it is." And something in how she said it, not cruel, not soft, just true, undid the clerk entirely. "He'll ruin me," Barrow whispered. "If he learns I said a word. He keeps ledgers, miss. Not just money. He keeps ledgers on people, things they've done. He's got a page on every man who's ever worked for him, and the day you stop being useful is the day he opens your page." The clerk was shaking now. "I can't. I only came to deliver the message. Please, forget I said anything past the message." "Barrow!" Nathaniel spoke for the first time, and his voice was not the voice of a rich fool. It stopped the clerk cold. "You said he keeps ledgers on people, on things they've done." The clerk stared at him, trapped, realizing far too late that he'd been speaking freely in front of a man he'd been told would understand nothing. "Does he keep a page on his own dealings?" Nathaniel went on, quiet, relentless. "The disappearance of a translator named Delacroix, for instance. Payments made to a man to leave the county the very day certain contracts came due." I never said—" "You're going to." Nathaniel took a step forward, and though he never raised his voice, the yard seemed smaller for his moving in it. "Not today. Today you'll ride back to Aldermore and tell him Miss Whitmore was insulted by his offer and threw you off the property, which is nearly the truth and will please him well enough. But you'll remember this yard, Barrow. You'll remember that the day comes for every man in Edward Aldermore's employ when he stops being useful, and when your day comes, you'll want a second door to walk through. I am that door. Remember it." The clerk fled. There was no other word for it. He was on his horse and out the gate before Constance had finished raising an eyebrow. Eleanor turned to Nathaniel slowly. "You were supposed to look rich and stupid." "I looked rich," Nathaniel said. "I ran short of stupid. You may have frightened off a witness." "No." He watched the dust settle where the clerk had ridden. "I planted one. A frightened man who's just been offered a way out remembers the man who offered it. He'll come back to us, Miss Whitmore. Not soon. Not until Aldermore's turned on him. But he'll come." He looked at her. "You taught me that in your parlor. A thing already confessed cannot be used to accuse. I've just given Barrow his confession to sit on. When he's finally ready to spend it, he'll spend it here." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, and there was something new in her face. A recalibration, the look of a person who has just discovered that the tool she picked up has an edge she didn't expect. "You're not what I took you for," she said. "No, I took you for a careful man who hires cleverness because he hasn't any of his own. But you've plenty of your own. You just keep it behind that still face and let people underestimate you." She almost smiled. "We're more alike than I'd like, Mr. Harrington." "That," Nathaniel said, "is the first frightening thing you've said to me." But the reprieve did not last the week. The story broke on a Sunday, which was how Eleanor knew Edward had timed it Sunday, when the whole county gathered, when a rumor could travel from pew to pew faster than any newspaper. By the time Eleanor and her aunt reached the churchyard, the whispering had already started, and it stopped the moment she appeared, which was worse than if it had gone on. Reverend Coyle would not meet her eye. The Ashford women turned their backs, all four of them, in a single practiced motion, like a gate swinging shut. And old Mrs. Pruitt, who had known Eleanor's mother, who had held Eleanor as an infant, looked at her with such open pity that Eleanor felt it like a slap. "What is it?" Margaret whispered. "What's he done?" Eleanor found out from a girl. A young thing, 16 perhaps, who hadn't yet learned to hide her face, and who blurted it out in a horrified rush before her mother could pull her away. "They're saying you stole from Mr. Aldermore, years ago. They're saying that's why he broke it off, that he found you'd been forging his papers and taking money, and he was too kind to see you hang, so he only put you aside quiet. They're saying you've done it again. To Mr. Harrington, that you're a—" The girl couldn't say the word. "A thief," Eleanor said. "You may say it. It won't bite." "Eleanor." Margaret's hand was on her arm, gripping. "We should go." "We should not." But Eleanor's voice had gone thin, and she hated it. She hated that after everything she had built to protect herself, the oldest wound still opened at a touch. Edward hadn't accused her of anything she could fight. He'd accused her of the fraud that was his, turned it on her, made her the forger and himself the merciful victim, and he'd done it in a church on a Sunday where no lawyer could follow and no evidence could reach. "He's a coward," she said, but quietly, only to her aunt. "He can't fight me over the contracts because he knows I'll win, so he's fighting me here, where the only evidence is whose word the county would rather believe. And they'd rather believe his. They always would rather believe his. Then we fight it somewhere else, not here." "There isn't anywhere else, Aunt. That's the whole cruelty of it. A woman's reputation isn't tried in a courtroom. It's tried in a churchyard. And I've just lost." She turned to go and found Nathaniel Harrington standing at the churchyard gate. She had not seen him arrive. He was not a church-going man. She'd have wagered money he hadn't set foot on that ground in years. But he was there now in his black coat with no ornament on it, and his sister beside him, and he had clearly heard enough because his face had gone to that terrible stillness she'd learned to read. The whispering changed pitch when the county saw him. Nathaniel Harrington, the richest man in Virginia, walking into a churchyard on the very Sunday the Whitmore woman was being torn apart in it. He crossed the ground straight to Eleanor. He did not lower his voice. He meant to be heard, and he was by every soul who'd turned their back. "Miss Whitmore, you're late for our appointment. I've a stack of contracts that won't read themselves, and no man in this county's clever enough to read them but you." He said it plainly as fact, and the fact rang out across the churchyard louder than any defense. "Mrs. Whitmore, ma'am, may I drive you both home? My carriage is at the gate. It was not a rescue. Eleanor understood that even as it happened, he wasn't stepping in front of her to shield her, he wasn't telling the county she was innocent. He wasn't fighting her fight. He was doing something colder and cleverer than that. He was standing beside her in front of the whole town and staking the Harrington name on her worth publicly so that every whisper about the thieving spinster now had to reckon with the fact that Nathaniel Harrington trusted her with his fortune. He hadn't defended her honor. He'd made her honor his own business risk, and a man like Harrington did not risk his fortune on a fool. The Ashford women didn't know where to look. Reverend Coyle suddenly found his voice murmuring something about the Lord's mercy on all sinners, which fooled no one. Eleanor took Nathaniel's offered arm because to refuse it would waste what he'd just done. But at the carriage low so only he could hear, she said, "You shouldn't have. You've hitched your name to mine in front of the whole county. If I fall now, I take you down with me." "I know." "Then why?" Nathaniel handed her up into the carriage before he answered. "Because I stood by once and let a boy walk into a thing I could have stopped," he said. "And I told myself it wasn't my fight. I've spent 11 years learning what that costs." He looked at her. "I don't do it twice." Eleanor had no answer for that. For the first time in a very long while, she had no answer at all. They rode in silence half the way to Willow Lane before Constance, who had been watching her brother's face with a sister's shrewdness, said what neither of them would. "He's not going to stop, you know. Aldermore. The churchyard was only the start. A man who'll shame you in front of God on a Sunday will do worse on a weekday." She looked at Eleanor. What's he protecting that he'd go this far this fast? And Eleanor, staring out at the passing road, felt the whole shape of it turn over in her mind at once, the way a thing you've been looking at wrong suddenly rights itself. "Not what?" she said slowly. "Who?" "What do you mean? I've been thinking of this the wrong way round. I've been asking why Edward wants Harrington's canal. But that's not the question. The question is why he needs it now. Why the rush? Why disappear a translator and forge 7 contracts and shame me in a churchyard all in the span of a fortnight when a patient man would have waited and taken the canal slow?" Eleanor's eyes had gone bright and cold. "He's not patient anymore. Something's changed. Some clock is running that I can't see. Edward Aldermore is afraid, and Edward is never afraid unless there's money he owes that he cannot pay." Nathaniel leaned forward. "You think he's in debt? I think he's drowning. I think this whole scheme isn't greed, it's rescue. He needs the canal's revenue, and he needs it fast, because he owes someone more than he has, and that someone isn't as merciful as he pretends to be with widows and spinsters." She turned to Nathaniel. "Find out who Edward Aldermore owes money to. Not the county gossip. The real ledger. Because whoever holds Edward's note holds Edward, and a man who's already been squeezed knows exactly how to break. How do I find a thing like that?" Eleanor almost smiled, and the smile was not a kind one. "You have a frightened clerk with 3 children and a page in Edward's ledger," she said. "You told him you were a second door. It's time to see whether he's ready to walk through it." But Edward moved first. He always moved first. The letter came to Willow Lane on a Tuesday, delivered not by a clerk this time, but by a constable. And Eleanor knew before she broke the seal that the game had turned again. She read it standing in the doorway. Her aunt watched her read it and watched the color leave her face. "Eleanor, what is it?" "He's summoned me," Eleanor said. "To answer a charge." "A charge of what?" Eleanor lowered the letter. When she spoke, her voice had the flatness that Margaret had learned to fear more than tears. "Theft," Eleanor said. "Edward Aldermore has sworn a complaint before the magistrate that 4 years ago I stole documents and monies from his household during our engagement, and that I have lately been passing off his own stolen work as my own to defraud Mr. Nathaniel Harrington." She folded the letter with hands that would not shake. "He's charged me with the crime he committed. He's had the papers this whole time, my father's manuscripts, my own drafts, every page, and now he'll produce them in a courtroom and swear I stole them from him. And the county's already been told the story in church, so they'll believe it the moment they hear it. He's not fighting my accusation, Aunt Margaret. He's beaten me to the courthouse and filed his own." Margaret sank into the good chair. "Then it's over." If you go before a magistrate and lose, you'll be—" She couldn't finish. "Ruined, or worse." "Yes." "Then don't go. Take Harrington's money, pay the note, and flee. Go north. There are cities where no one knows your name. And leave him with it." Eleanor's voice cracked at last, just once, and she steadied it by force. "Leave Edward Aldermore holding my father's life's work and calling it his own, calling me the thief, and going on to squeeze 400 honest men who'll never know why their wages shrank. No, Aunt. He's made one mistake. Do you see it? I see nothing but ruin. He's put it before a magistrate." Eleanor's eyes had gone bright and terrible again. "In the churchyard, it was only whispers and whispers. I can't fight. There's no evidence, only which of us the county prefers. But a courtroom needs evidence. He'll have to produce my father's manuscripts to prove I stole them. He'll have to put the very documents on a table in front of a magistrate. And the moment he does that, Aunt Margaret," she leaned forward, "the moment those manuscripts are in a room where I'm allowed to speak, I can prove they're my father's. The dates, the methods, the hand. He's spent 6 years keeping that proof locked in his house, where I could never reach it. And now, to destroy me, he's going to carry it into the one room where I can reach it. He's dragging the evidence into the light with his own 2 hands. Margaret stared at her niece. "He doesn't know," she breathed. "He doesn't know you can prove it. He thinks he's holding a knife. He doesn't know he's handing me a witness." Eleanor was already moving, already reaching for her shawl, already the woman she became when the game finally turned her way. "Send to Harrington Estate. Tell Mr. Harrington I need his man of law, and I need him tonight. Tell him Edward's made his move, and it's the wrong one." She stopped at the door and looked back at her aunt, and for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, Eleanor Whitmore looked not cornered, but hungry. 6 years I've waited to stand in a room with those manuscripts and be permitted to speak," she said. "He's about to give me the room, and he thinks he's winning." She pulled the door open on the summer evening. "Let him think it, right up until the moment I read my father's own words aloud and the whole county learns who the thief has been all along." Nathaniel's man of law arrived at Willow Lane before the moon was full up, and his name was Josiah Vance, and he did not like what Eleanor was proposing. "You want to walk into a hearing you're charged in," Vance said, "and turn it against the man who filed it. Miss Whitmore, that is not how a defense works. A defendant defends. She does not attack." "Then I'll be the first." "You'll be the first convicted. Aldermore has the manuscripts. He has possession, which is 9 parts of the law's favor. He has a story the county already swallowed on Sunday. And he has a magistrate." Vance lowered his voice, though there was no one to hear. "A magistrate named Pell, who owes Edward Aldermore money. I checked this afternoon. Pell's farm carries a note, and guess whose name is on it?" The room went quiet. "Edwards," Eleanor said. "Edwards. So even if you prove every word you claim, you'll be proving it to a man who eats at Aldermore's pleasure." Vance spread his hands. "I'm sorry. My counsel is to settle. Take the debt forgiveness he offered, sign the silence, and count yourself lucky to keep your neck." Nathaniel had said nothing through all of this. He stood by the cold hearth with his arms folded, watching Eleanor the way he always watched her. And now he spoke. "Vance, if the magistrate is bought, then the magistrate is the problem, not the manuscripts. He's the county magistrate, Mr. Harrington. There's no one buying him by Thursday." "No," Nathaniel agreed. "But there's making him afraid to rule the wrong way in front of witnesses. A crooked judge is only bold in an empty room." He looked at Eleanor. "How many people can you fit in that hearing?" And Eleanor understood him at once, and something kindled behind her eyes. "You want an audience. I want the whole county in that room," Nathaniel said. "The same county that turned its back in the churchyard." Aldermore filed this to be tried quiet, before a friendly magistrate on a weekday, when honest folk are working. So we make it loud. We make it the event of the season. We fill every bench with the men whose wages Aldermore means to steal, and we let them watch you read." He turned to Vance. "A bought magistrate will still convict an innocent woman in an empty room. He will not do it in a full one with 400 canal men watching when the evidence of his own eyes says otherwise. Pell owes Aldermore money, but Pell has to go on living in this county after Thursday, and a man remembers who watched him do a shameful thing. Vance looked from one of them to the other, and something in his lawyer's face shifted from despair toward calculation. "You'd need the manuscripts admitted," he said slowly. "That's the hinge. If Aldermore's clever, and he is, he'll describe the documents and never produce them. Say they're too precious, too fragile, kept safe at his estate. He'll swear to their contents without letting Miss Whitmore's hands ever touch them. And a swearing is enough to convict if the magistrate wants it to be." "Then we make him produce them," Eleanor said. "How?" "By making him want to." Eleanor sat down slowly, and the fast, cold machinery of her mind was working now, and both men watched it work. "Edward's whole case is that I'm a thief who forged his work and passed it off as mine. His whole pride is that the work is his, that clever Eleanor Whitmore was only ever copying what belonged to a cleverer man. He's spent 6 years telling that story. He needs it to be true more than he needs the verdict." She looked up. "So I'll challenge it. In the hearing. I'll stand up and say the manuscripts he claims I stole are crude forgeries, that no scholar could mistake them for genuine, and that if the magistrate would only produce them, I could prove in a moment they're worthless copies. It's a lie. But Edward can't bear it. His vanity won't let a room believe his prize documents are worthless. He'll produce them just to prove they're real. He'll carry my father's genuine manuscripts into that room with his own hands. To prove they're not forgeries," Vance breathed. "And the moment they're on the table, they're in a room where I'm permitted to speak, and I can read them. And he cannot." Eleanor's voice was very quiet now. "That's the whole of it, gentlemen. Edward Aldermore has never been able to read a word of what he stole. He's held my father's manuscripts for 6 years, and they've been closed books to him, Latin and French and German ciphers he keeps, like a man keeps a locked chest whose key he's lost. He knows they're valuable. He's never known what they say, and I know every word." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to provoke him into producing the one thing that destroys him. He'll do it gladly. That's the beauty of it. He'll think he's winning right up to the last." Vance packed his satchel that night a changed man. At the door he paused. "Miss Whitmore, if this fails, if Pell rules against you regardless, you understand what happens. I hang, or near enough." "Yes. Then it had best not fail." Eleanor held the door for him. "Fill the benches, Mr. Vance. That's your task now. Every canal man, every merchant, Edward's ever cheated every soul in this county with a grievance and a Thursday free. I'll take care of Edward. You take care of the room." The hearing was set for Thursday morning, and by the grace of Nathaniel Harrington's money and Josiah Vance's tongue, the room was not empty. It was crammed. It was overflowing. Word had gone out, carried by Nathaniel's foreman to every camp along the canal, cut that the richest man in Virginia would be standing behind the Whitmore woman, and that the Aldermore who meant to shrink their wages would be standing against her. And a working man will walk 10 miles to watch the man who's robbing him get his comeuppance. They filled every bench. They lined the walls. They stood in the doorway and spilled out into the yard, and Magistrate Pell, when he took his seat, looked out at that packed and muttering room with the face of a man who has swallowed something that will not go down. Edward Aldermore arrived last, as such men do, to be seen arriving. He was handsome still, Eleanor noted with the strange detachment that came over her in the worst moments. Handsome in the smooth, unlined way of a man who has never once doubted himself. He wore a coat that cost more than the house on Willow Lane. He nodded to the magistrate like a man greeting a servant, and when his eyes found Eleanor, he smiled, and it was the smile she remembered, the smile that had once made her feel chosen, and had only ever meant owned. "Eleanor," he said, as though they were old friends, "I did so hope you'd settle. I've no wish to see you humiliated." "No," Eleanor said. "You've a great wish to see me humiliated. You've simply grown used to doing it where it can't be answered. You'll find today's room somewhat different." His smile flickered, just a hair at the crowd at the canal men, at Nathaniel Harrington, seated in the front row with his still face and folded arms. But Edward Aldermore had not built what he'd built by rattling easily, and the smile came back. "Let us begin then," he said. Magistrate Pell called the room to order, and it obeyed him poorly, and Eleanor saw him sweat. He read the charge in a thin voice: theft of documents and monies, and the passing of stolen work, to defraud 4 years past, and lately renewed, and all through the reading the canal men murmured low, a sound like weather building. Edward spoke first. He was good. Eleanor would give him that. She had loved him once in part for exactly this ease. He told the room a story of a young scholar's daughter he'd taken into his household out of Christian charity, given the run of his library trusted with his correspondence, and who had repaid that trust by copying his private documents, skimming his accounts, and when at last he'd discovered it, forcing him to the painful choice of casting her out quietly rather than seeing her hang. He was too kind, he said. He'd always been too kind. And now, 4 years on, he'd learned the woman he'd spared was passing off his own stolen methods as her genius to poison Nathaniel Harrington against him. It was a beautiful lie. It was the exact inversion of the truth, which is the strongest lie there is, because it fits every fact the county already knew. Eleanor watched the benches as he spoke, and her heart sank because she could see it working. Heads nodding. The story settling into place over the churchyard, whispers confirming them. Even some of the canal men looked uncertain now. "He's good," Nathaniel murmured low beside her. "The room's turning." "I know. Can you turn it back?" "Not by defending. He's built it so any defense sounds like a thief's excuse." Eleanor's hands were folded in her lap, perfectly still. "I have to make him hand me the manuscripts. Nothing else matters. Everything he said is smoke until those papers are on the table." Edward finished. He sat satisfied to a room that half believed him. Pell turned to Eleanor with visible reluctance. "The accused may answer." Eleanor rose. She did not defend herself. She'd told Vance she wouldn't, and she didn't. She let the silence stretch until the room leaned in, and then she spoke, and her voice carried to the last man in the doorway. "Mr. Aldermore has told you a great story about stolen documents," she said. "Documents of such value that a woman would risk hanging to possess them. Manuscripts so precious he's kept them locked away for 6 years. I'd like to ask the room a simple question." She turned slowly to face the benches. "Where are they?" The room stirred. "He speaks of my father's manuscripts as treasures, as the fount of all the cleverness he says I stole. But he hasn't shown them to you. He's described them. He's asked you to take his word for what they contain, what they're worth, whose hand wrote them. And do you know why?" She let the pause breathe. "Because they're worthless. Because the documents Edward Aldermore is so precious about are crude, clumsy forgeries, copies a schoolboy could see through, and the moment a scholar's eye falls on them, his whole story collapses. He won't produce them because he can't let you see how poor they are." It landed exactly as she'd known it would. Edward Aldermore came out of his chair. "That is a lie." His voice had cracked its smoothness. "Those manuscripts are genuine. They are worth more than everything that woman's family ever owned." "Then produce them," Eleanor said. "The finest scholarly documents in this county in 7 languages, and no forgery on this earth. Then produce them, Edward." Eleanor's voice rose over his for the first time, and the room went dead silent. "You've brought them, haven't you? A man doesn't come to prove a theft without the thing that was stolen. They're in this building right now, so set them on the table. Let the magistrate see. Let this whole room see. Prove they're genuine. Prove they're precious. Prove I'm the thief you say I am, or admit before every soul here that you've been lying about worthless paper for 6 years." It was the trap, and she watched him fall into it exactly as she'd planned, and even knowing it was coming, she could hardly breathe. Because Edward Aldermore could not bear it. His pride would not let a room full of the men who feared him believe that his treasures were trash. His vanity was the one thing stronger than his cunning, and she had known, that had staked her life on it because she had loved him once, and a woman who has loved a man knows precisely where his vanity lives. "Bring them," Edward snapped to his own clerk, to Thomas Barrow, who stood pale at the back of the room. "Bring the case. I'll not sit here and be called a liar by a thieving woman in front of—" "Edward." Barrow's voice was almost too quiet to hear. "Edward, perhaps we ought not. Bring the case, Barrow, or by God, I'll—" And Eleanor saw it, in that half-second, saw Barrow's face, saw the naked terror on it, saw the clerk understand something his master hadn't yet. But Edward's fury rolled over it, and Barrow went and came back with a flat leather case and set it on the magistrate's table with hands that shook. "Open it," Edward commanded. "Show them. Genuine, every page." Barrow opened it, and the manuscripts were there. Eleanor's breath caught at the sight of them. Her father's hand. Pages she hadn't seen in 6 years. Pages she'd grieved as lost spread now on a table in a public room in the light where she stood where she was permitted to speak. Edward turned to the magistrate in triumph. "There. Genuine. Any man may see the quality." "May I approach the documents?" Eleanor said, "as I've been accused of stealing them." Pell hesitated. He looked at Aldermore. Aldermore, riding high on his own vindication, waved a careless hand. "Let her look. Let her see what she can never make. Let her—" Eleanor crossed to the table. She did not touch them at first. She looked. And the room watched a woman look at pages of writing, the way another woman might look at the face of a child she'd lost, and something in that looking silenced even the muttering canalmen. Then she picked up the topmost page. "This is my father's hand," she said quietly. "Ezra Whitmore, scholar of Williamsburg. Dead these 6 years, God rest him." She turned the page toward the light. "It's a treatise on marine transfer law written in Latin, dated," she pointed, "here, in his own hand, 11 years ago, when Edward Aldermore was a tobacco factor who could not have told a French contract from a shopping list." The room stirred. "Read it," someone called from the benches, a canal man rough-voiced. "Read it out. Let's hear it." "Silence," Pell said weakly. "No," Eleanor said. "Let them hear it. That's fair, isn't it? Magistrate Mr. Aldermore claims this is his stolen property, the source of methods I passed off as mine. So let me read it. And let Mr. Aldermore read it after me. And the room can decide which of us knows what these pages say." She turned to Edward, and her voice went soft and deadly. "You've held these 6 years, Edward. Read me one line. 1. In any of the 7 tongues you claim I stole from you. Read the room a single sentence of your precious manuscripts." The silence in that room was absolute. Edward Aldermore stood very straight, and the color drained from his handsome face because he could not read a word of it. He never had been able to. He had held a locked chest for 6 years and called himself its owner, and now a woman had asked him to open it in front of 400 witnesses, and he had no key. "This is a scholar's parlor trick," he managed. "I'll not perform like a read one line, Edward. The genuineness of a document is not established by one line. By public recitation, it is a matter for experts." "Then I'll read it," Eleanor said, "and we'll all learn together whether I'm an expert or a thief." And she read. She read her father's Latin in a clear, carrying voice, and then rendered it into English so the canalmen could follow a passage on the transfer of title in maritime contracts, precise and elegant, and unmistakably the mind she'd learned from. She turned the page and read the French. She turned again and read the German. She read the very passage she found it, her finger stopping on the line, and her voice did not waver, that formed the backbone of the fraud Edward had worked against Nathaniel Harrington. The profit from failure clause, her father's method. Written in her father's hand 11 years ago, twisted into a weapon by a man who'd stolen it and never understood it. "There," she said, laying the page down. "The very clause Mr. Aldermore used to build his fraud against the canal, written by my father in Latin before Edward Aldermore knew the word canal. He didn't invent these methods. He couldn't read them. He stole them, kept them locked away from the one person alive who could read them, and turned them against honest men. And when I threatened to expose it, he charged me with the theft, because he knew that in a churchyard my word would never beat his. She turned to the packed benches to the canalmen whose wages hung on all of this. But this is not a churchyard. This is a room with the evidence on the table. So I ask you plainly, which of us is the thief? The woman who can read every word, or the man who's owned them 6 years and can't read one? The room broke, not into cheers, into something lower and more dangerous. A growl of understanding, rolling through 400 men who had walked 10 miles to watch, and now understood exactly what they'd come to see. Magistrate Pell was on his feet, calling for order that would not come. And Edward Aldermore stood in the middle of it all, and Eleanor watched the moment his cunning finally cracked. Watched the smooth, handsome mask come apart, and what was underneath was not clever at all. It was only frightened. "She helped me," Edward said, loudly, desperately over the growing noise. "She was my betrothed. She drafted those contracts herself. She's as deep in this as I am. She's only turned on me to save her own." "When?" Eleanor cut in. "She wrote when Edward. These fraudulent contracts against Mr. Harrington were drafted this spring, this summer. I've been in the county the whole while, and every soul here knows you, and I haven't exchanged a civil word in 4 years. So when did I help you? Where? Name the day. Name the room." She stepped toward him. "You can't, because I didn't. You built this fraud alone from my father's stolen methods, and now that it's collapsing, you drag me down into it the same way you dragged me down in the churchyard, the same way you've dragged me down every day for 6 years, because it's the only thing you've ever known how to do. You take a woman's work and call it yours. You take her name and call her a thief. You take and you take and you take, and you have never once in your life made a single thing, and now this whole room can see it. You—" Edward's composure was gone entirely now. "You scheming, bitter—" "Careful," said a voice. It was Nathaniel Harrington. He had not raised his voice. He never did. But he had risen from the front bench, and the room quieted for him, the way it always quieted for him. And he looked at Edward Aldermore with an expression Eleanor had never seen him wear, not the still fury she knew, but something worse for Edward, something almost like pity. "You want to know how deep she's in your scheme, Aldermore," Nathaniel said. "So did I. I'm not a trusting man. When Miss Whitmore came to my aid, I wondered, as you'd have me wonder, whether she'd led me into it. So I did what you never counted on. I looked into you." He drew a folded paper from his coat. "Do you know a lender named Marcus Thorne, Baltimore man, hard man, holds a great deal of paper up and down this coast?" Edward Aldermore went white to the lips. "I see you do," Nathaniel said. "You owe him $11,000 due at summer's end. That's the clock, isn't it? That's why the rush. That's why you disappeared a translator and forged 7 contracts and shamed a good woman in a churchyard, not out of greed but out of terror. Because if you can't squeeze my canal for the money by August, Marcus Thorne squeezes you, and Marcus Thorne doesn't take a man's house. He takes the man." He set the paper on the table beside the manuscripts. "It's all here. Barrow's not the only clerk in Virginia. Money leaves a trail, Aldermore, even when the words are hidden, especially when a frightened man moves fast." The room had gone silent again. A different silence, the silence of a crowd watching a powerful man come apart. And it was Thomas Barrow who ended it. The clerk had been standing at the back the whole while, pale, shaking, watching his master drown. And now he stepped forward one step, then another, into the middle of the room, into the light, and he said in a voice that broke halfway through, "I'll tell it. God help me. I'll tell all of it." He would not look at Edward. He looked at Eleanor and at Nathaniel at the second door he'd been offered in a dusty yard. "I wrote the contracts, every forgery. He dictated and I wrote. I paid Delacroix to leave the county Mr. Aldermore's money. His instruction, I've the record of it in my own book because he made me keep it. He makes me keep everything. And the manuscripts." Barrow's voice cracked. "I catalogued them when they came from the auction. 6 years ago. Ezra Whitmore's papers every page, and Mr. Aldermore couldn't read a line. And he'd have me bring him this book or that, and pretend to study it in front of guests, and it was all— The clerk was weeping now openly, a small ruined man. It was all a lie, the whole of it. She's no thief. She never was. He's kept her father's soul in a box he couldn't even open. And that was the moment the room turned. Entirely turned like a tide all at once, and Magistrate Pell, looking out at 400 faces that had just watched the truth laid bare, understood that whatever Edward Aldermore's note held over his farm ruling against Eleanor Whitmore now would cost him more than money. It would cost him the county. It would cost him the rest of his life in it. Order? Pell said faintly. And then, because there was nothing else left to say, because the evidence was on the table, and the clerk had confessed, and the whole world was watching Mr. Aldermore. These are grave matters, grave and documented. This court cannot proceed on your complaint. The complaint is— He swallowed. Dismissed. And I'll want the constable to take these documents into safekeeping, and Mr. Barrow's records with them pending. He did not finish. He did not know how to finish. He had been handed a fire and told to hold it. Edward Aldermore stood alone in the middle of the room. Alone as Eleanor had never once been allowed to be alone for. She'd had her aunt, and now she had Nathaniel and Constance and Vance, and even weeping ruined Barrow. But Edward stood in a room full of people who had feared him an hour ago, and did not fear him now. And there is nothing on this earth as friendless as a frightening man who has stopped being frightening. He looked at Eleanor. And for one moment the mask was entirely gone, and she saw the whole of him. Not a villain, not a mastermind. Just a hollow, terrified, grasping man who had never made a single thing in his life, and had spent it all taking, and who understood, now far too late, that the woman he'd thrown away had been the only real thing he ever held. Eleanor, he said, just her name, as if it might still open some door. You could have had a partner, Eleanor said quietly, not cruelly, almost sadly. 11 years ago. You could have married my mind instead of stealing it, and we'd have built something real, and no lender in Baltimore would frighten you today because we'd have had something no one could take. But you couldn't bear to sit beside a clever woman. You could only bear to own one. She stepped back from him. So own this instead, Edward. This room, this ruin. You built it. Every stone. You did it all yourself. She turned her back on him the first time in 6 years she had ever been able to, and walked toward Nathaniel Harrington through a crowd that parted for her now and did not whisper, and one by one as she passed the canal men took off their hats. The dismissal was not the end of it, though the county spoke as if it were. Eleanor knew better before the courtroom had half emptied. She had turned her back on Edward Aldermore, yes, and it had felt like walking out from under a weight she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. But a dismissed complaint was not a conviction, and a ruined reputation was not a return of what was stolen, and Edward Aldermore was still, for all his friendlessness, a man who owed $11,000 to a hard lender in Baltimore, and would do anything on earth to get it. He'll run, Vance said, catching up to her on the courthouse steps, satchel banging his hip. Aldermore, a man who's just been unmasked in front of the county with a debt like that coming due, he'll be gone by morning. And when a man runs Miss Whitmore, the evidence tends to run with him. Eleanor stopped on the steps. The manuscripts are with the constable, she said. Pell ordered them seized. The manuscripts, yes. But Barrow's confession isn't sworn yet, only spoken. And your father's papers aren't the whole of it. Think. Vance lowered his voice. The fraud against Mr. Harrington's canal, those 7 contracts. If Aldermore burns his own copies tonight and denies everything come morning, if Barrow loses his nerve and recants to save his neck, what's left? A dismissed complaint and a room full of memories. Memories don't hold up. A man like Aldermore can rebuild on the ruins of a memory. Nathaniel had come out behind them, Constance at his side. He'd heard enough. Then we don't give him the night, Nathaniel said. Vance, how fast can you draw a complaint of our own fraud, forgery, the bribing of Delacroix, the whole of it sworn with Barrow's name on it, before Barrow sleeps and thinks better of it? Tonight it would be rough, but rough will do. A rough complaint filed tonight beats a perfect one filed after the man's fled to Baltimore. Nathaniel turned to Eleanor. That is if Miss Whitmore agrees. It's her father's name on those papers. Her word that carries the reading. I'll not swear a complaint built on her evidence without her at the front of it. And Eleanor understood in that small courtesy exactly the thing that separated Nathaniel Harrington from every other powerful man she'd ever stood beside. Edward would have swept her aside and taken the credit and the risk, both called it protection. Nathaniel handed her the choice, as though it had never occurred to him to do otherwise. "File it," she said, "and find Barrow before Edward does. Barrow's the hinge now. If Edward gets an hour alone with that man with threats with money with that ledger of secrets he keeps Barrow recants, and we're left with nothing but my voice against Edward's, and we're back in the churchyard." They were too slow by an hour. They found Barrow's rooms above the chandler's shop, dark, and the door standing open and a chair overturned and the clerk gone, not fled. Eleanor saw at once reading the room the way she read everything, because a fleeing man packs and a taken man does not. His coat still hung on its peg. His supper sat cold on the table, half-eaten. His children's small shoes were lined by the door. "He didn't run," she said. "Someone came for him." Constance's hand went to her mouth. Aldermore, or Thorne's men, the Baltimore lender. Eleanor's mind was moving fast and cold. If Edwards told Thorne the canal money's gone, and he'd have to, he's out of time, then Thorne knows his 11,000's in danger, and Thorne is not a patient man. Barrow's the one who kept the records of every dollar. Barrow's the one who can prove where Thorne's money really went. He's valuable to everyone and safe with no one. She turned to Nathaniel. "We have to find him, not for the case, for the man. He has 3 children and a wife, and he told the truth in that courtroom when it would have been easier to let me hang, and I'll not have him disappear into a river for it." Where would they take him? If it's Edward, his estate. Edward doesn't improvise. He takes things to ground he controls. Eleanor was already moving for the door. If it's Thorne's men, they'd want him on the road to Baltimore, but they'd not travel by night with a struggling man. They'd hold him close and move at dawn. She stopped. Either way, the answer's at Aldermore's estate. That's where the ledger is. That's where the secrets live. That's where a frightened man takes the one witness who could hang him. "Then we go," Nathaniel said. "You go," Eleanor corrected. "You and men who can handle themselves, not me." Nathaniel looked at her. "I know what you're going to say," Eleanor said before he could. "That you'll not leave me behind, that we've come this far together. But listen to me. If Edward has Barrow, then Edward is cornered, and a cornered Edward is more dangerous than a comfortable one. He can't hurt me with reputation anymore. I've nothing left he can take that way. So the only thing left is to hurt me plainly. And if I walk onto his estate tonight, I hand him exactly the chance he needs. I'd be a hostage, not a help." She held his eyes. "But there's a thing I can do that you can't, the ledger. Edward's book of secrets. The one Barrow said holds a page on every man Edwards ever used. If it's in that house, it's written in the same locked tongues as everything else Edwards habit hiding his sins, where no ordinary man can read them. You could hold that book in your hands and not know what you had. I could read it in the dark. So you bring me the book, Nathaniel, however you have to. Get Barrow out and bring me that ledger, and I'll give you every crime Edward Aldermore ever committed, in his own words, in whatever language he thought would keep them safe." It was the first time she'd called him by his given name. He noticed. She saw him notice. But there was no time for it, and he only nodded once and said, "Constance, stay with her. Vance the complaint, keep drawing it. I'll bring back what it needs." And he went out into the summer dark with 4 of his foreman hardmen, who dug canals and settled worse arguments than this, and Eleanor stood in the taken man's empty rooms and looked at the small shoes by the door and let herself for one moment be afraid. "He'll come back," Constance said quietly. "My brother. He always comes back. It's the one thing you can count on with him. He came back from a war that took our brother. He'll come back from Edward Aldermore's front hall." "It isn't your brother I'm afraid for," Eleanor said. "It's the man with 3 children." The hours between were the longest Eleanor had ever known, and she had known some long ones. She and Constance and Vance waited at Willow Lane, because there was nowhere else to wait, and Aunt Margaret made tea. No one drank, and the candle burned down, and every sound in the road brought all four of them to their feet. Near 2 a.m, the sound in the road was hooves, many of them fast. Nathaniel came through the door with Barrow half carried between two of his foremen. The clerk was alive, bruised about the face. One arm held awkward, but alive and weeping again, and clutching a flat leather book to his chest, with the arm that still worked. "They had him in the stable," Nathaniel said. His coat was torn at the shoulder. There was blood at his knuckles that Eleanor did not think was his. Aldermore and 2 men. Thorne's men, I'd guess by the look of them, Baltimore hard cases, not local. They meant to move him at first light, toward the water. He didn't say the rest. He didn't have to. "Edward?" Eleanor asked. "Gone. Went out a back way when the fighting started. He's no stomach for the doing of a thing, only the ordering of it." Nathaniel's mouth was grim. "He's running now, for certain. He'll be on the Baltimore road by dawn, or trying to be. Which means we've hours no more to make this hold before he's out of the county's reach." Barrow lifted the book. His hands shook so the leather rattled. "I got it," he whispered. When Mr. Harrington's men came in and it went to fighting, I got it off the shelf. I knew where he kept it. I've dusted around it 6 years." His ruined face turned to Eleanor. "It's all in there, miss. Everything he ever made me write. But it's in his hidden way. His languages. I never could read the half of it. He'd laugh about that. Said even the man who held his pen couldn't read his sins." Eleanor took the book. It was heavier than it looked. 6 years of a man's private wickedness, kept in ciphers of French and Latin and German in a private shorthand Edward had thought no one alive could crack. And Eleanor sat down at the little table where the tea had gone cold and opened it, and by the light of the last candle she began to read aloud what Edward Aldermore had spent a decade hiding, and Vance wrote it down as fast as she read, and Constance held the candle steady, and Nathaniel stood behind her chair with his torn coat and his bloodied knuckles, and did not once tell her to hurry, though every hour that Edward rode was an hour toward escape. It was worse than they'd guessed. It was so much worse. The bribing of Delacroix was in there, dated the sum recorded. But so was more years more. A widow named Alton, whose late husband's shipping papers Edward had altered to seize her share. Eleanor read the entry, and her voice caught because she knew Mrs. Alton, a bent old woman who took in sewing now, and had once, it seemed, owned half a fleet. A land dispute settled by a forged deed. A rival merchant driven to ruin by contracts written to fail. The names of 3 other men Edward held by their secrets, pages on each of them, small cruelties recorded like a shopkeeper's accounts. And near the back in the newest ink, the whole of the canal fraud laid out plain, the 7 contracts, the depot company, the profit from failure clause stolen from Ezra Whitmore's manuscripts, and Marcus Thorne's $11,000, and the desperate arithmetic of a man trying to steal his way out of a debt before it swallowed him. "He wrote it all down," Vance breathed when Eleanor finally stopped near Dawn, her voice worn to a thread. "Why in God's name would a man write his own crimes down?" "Because he needed them," Eleanor said. "The pages on other men, those were his weapons, his hold over them. He couldn't threaten a man with a secret he hadn't recorded." She closed the book slowly. "And the rest, his own crimes he recorded because he couldn't help it. He's a man who takes things and keeps them. He kept my father's manuscripts he couldn't read. He kept my old drafts after he threw me over. He kept me, he'd have kept me forever if I'd only agreed to be small enough." She looked at the book. "It's the same sickness all through him. He can't let go of a thing he's taken, not even the record of his own ruin." Nathaniel spoke from behind her. "It's enough then, to finish him. It's enough to finish 10 of him. There are men named in this book who've suffered as I have, and never knew why. Widows. Cheated partners. This isn't only my justice, Nathaniel. It's theirs. All of theirs." She turned in her chair to look up at him. "But it means nothing if he reaches Baltimore. If he gets to Thorne, if he gets across a state line, if he vanishes into a city, the book's just paper, and the crimes are just stories. We need him held. Here. Now. Before the sun's full up. Vance was already gathering his notes. The complaint's ready. I've been writing it as she read. Fraud, forgery, bribery, the false accusation against Miss Whitmore, the abduction of a witness tonight. It wants only a magistrate's hand to make it a warrant. The room went quiet, because they all knew the only magistrate near enough to sign it before Edward reached the county line was Pell. Pell, who owed Edward money. Pell, who had dismissed Edward's complaint only because a roomful of witnesses had left him no choice. "He won't sign," Constance said. "Not against Aldermore. Not with that note over his farm." "He signed the dismissal," Eleanor said slowly. "That was with 400 men watching. This is a warrant in the dark at dawn with no one to see. He'll find a reason. He'll say the complaint's improper, or he'll be conveniently abed, or he'll send word to Edward the moment we leave. Pell's a coward, and a coward with a debt is the worst kind." Eleanor stood. She was gray with exhaustion, her voice nearly gone, but her eyes were clear. "Then I'll go to Pell myself," she said. "And I'll bring the book." "Eleanor," Nathaniel started. "There's a page on him." She lifted the ledger. "In here. I read it an hour ago and said nothing because I was waiting to see how it would matter. Pell's note, the one Edward holds over his farm, it wasn't an honest loan. Edward manufactured it. Lent Pell money to cover a gambling debt years back, then altered the terms after the fact to double what was owed so he'd have a magistrate in his pocket forever. It's all recorded. Edward's own hand. The date, the sum, the alteration." She looked at them each in turn. "Pell thinks he's Edward's servant because he owes a fair debt he can't pay. He doesn't know the debt itself is a forgery. He doesn't know that the very thing binding him to Edward is the thing that could free him and hang Edward for one more count of fraud." Nathaniel understood first. He always understood her first now. "You're going to offer him his freedom," he said, "in exchange for the warrant." "I'm going to show him the truth," Eleanor corrected, "and let him choose what it's worth to him. A coward will stay a coward while he thinks he's trapped. But show a trapped man the door's been open all along. Show him the man he feared has been cheating him for years. And even a coward can find his spine if only out of spite." She started for the door, then turned back, and for just a moment the exhaustion cracked, and something raw showed through. "I spent 6 years believing the world was arranged against me, and there was nothing to be done but shrink. I was wrong. It wasn't arranged against me. It was only afraid, and being afraid it did the easy cowardly thing. Pell's the whole county in one frightened man. If I can turn him, I can turn anything." She went to Pell's farm as the sun came up, and she did not go alone. Nathaniel would not permit that, and this time she did not argue, because a warrant needed a witness, and a woman on a magistrate's doorstep at dawn needed one more. But she did the talking. She laid the ledger open on Pell's own kitchen table, and she read him the page that was written about him in Edward Aldermore's private hand, the forged debt and the doubled terms and the years of quiet ownership. And she watched a frightened man's face move from disbelief to fury, to something that was almost, at the last, like grief for all the small shameful things he'd done believing he had no choice. "He doubled it," Pell said. His voice was hollow. "All these years, every ruling I bent his way, every time I looked the other side. I thought I owed him. I thought I was a man paying an honest debt as best he could." He put his face in his hands. "And the debt was a lie from the start." "The debt was a leash," Eleanor said. "He put it on you the way he tried to put one on me, on Barrow, on half the county. He doesn't have friends, magistrate. He has debtors. And a man with only debtors has no one at all when the debtors learn the debts were forged." Pell lowered his hands. He looked at the warrant Vance had drawn. He looked at the ledger. He looked for a long moment at Eleanor Whitmore, the woman he'd been fully prepared to convict 2 days before, to keep his own miserable secret safe. "They said you were bitter," he said quietly. "Aldermore's always said it. The bitter Whitmore woman." "I was never bitter," Eleanor said. "I was only right in a place that had no use for a right woman. It sounds very much the same from the outside." Pell took up the pen. He signed the warrant with a hand that steadied as it moved, as though the signing itself were straightening something in him that had been bent a long while, and when it was done, he pushed it across the table and said, take it, and take him, and God forgive me for how long I let him take from all of you." He looked at the ledger. "And that book, when this is done, the men in it, the widow Alton, the others, they ought to know. They ought to have back what he took so far as anything can be given back." "They will," Eleanor said, folding the warrant. "Every one of them, I promise you that." They took Edward Aldermore on the Baltimore Road 4 miles short of the county line in the full light of a summer morning. He had ridden all night, and his horse was blown, and he was alone. Even the 2 Baltimore men had scattered when the fighting went against them in the stable. And when the constable rode him down with Nathaniel's foreman at his back and Vance's warrant in his hand, Edward Aldermore did not fight and did not run, because there was no longer anywhere on earth for him to run to. Eleanor was not there for the taking. She'd stayed at Willow Lane, and she'd told herself it was because she was too tired to ride, and that was partly true. But the deeper truth, the one she admitted only to herself, was that she had no wish to watch it. She had thought all those years that she would want to see his face at the end, that she would want to stand over him the way he'd stood over her. And when the moment came, she found she wanted nothing of the kind. She wanted only for it to be over, and for the widow Alton to have her fleet back, and for Barrow's children to keep their father, and for the world to be in one small county, 1 degree less arranged for the cruel. Nathaniel came to her that evening. He was clean now, the torn coat exchanged the blood washed from his knuckles, and he found her in the parlor at Willow Lane, with her father's manuscripts spread before her, returned by the constable, hers again after 6 years, and she was not reading them. She was only looking at them, one hand flat on the topmost page, the way a person touches the face of someone come home. "It's done," he said. "He's in the county jail. Thorne's complaint against him will follow. A lender doesn't forgive a man who's lost his money and his freedom both. And the ledger goes to the court, all of it, every name. Vance says Aldermore will not see the outside of a cell for a very long time, if ever." He stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, as he'd stood the first morning. "It's done, Eleanor." She did not look up from her father's pages. "When I was 15, she said, my father told me that a mind like mine would be a hard thing to carry in the world we lived in. He said it would make me lonely. He said people fear a thing they can't measure, and a clever woman is a thing most men can't measure, so they'd rather call her broken than admit they couldn't take her measure." She traced a line of Latin with one finger. "I thought he was warning me. I understand now he was grieving. He knew what was coming, and he couldn't spare me a moment of it, and it broke his heart. And he wrote all this?" Her hand pressed the page, so that at least the knowing wouldn't die with him. "He left me his mind, because it was the only inheritance the world would let a daughter keep." Nathaniel came and sat uninvited in the good chair across from her. It groaned under him, as it had that first day. He was right about the loneliness, he said, and wrong about the rest. Was he? You were never broken, and you were only lonely because the county was too small and too frightened to hold you. That's not a fault in you, Eleanor. It's a fault in the room. He was quiet a moment. "I know something of it, not the same. I'll not pretend the same. But a man who comes home from a war he sent his brother to die in, that man learns what it is to sit in a full room and be entirely alone. I stopped trusting anyone. I told myself it was wisdom. It was only fear wearing wisdom's coat." He looked at her across the small table. "You're the first person in 11 years I've trusted with anything that could ruin me. I didn't decide to. I just found one day that I had." Eleanor looked up from the manuscripts at last. "You hitched your name to mine in a churchyard," she said. "You bled on Edward Aldermore's stable floor for a clerk you barely knew. You waited behind my chair all night while I read a wicked book and never once told me to hurry, though every hour cost you." Her voice was very quiet. "Why?" "I've told you why. I don't stand by twice. That's why you help at Barrow. It's not why you stayed behind my chair." She held his eyes. "Say the true thing, Nathaniel. I've spent my whole life being told half-truths dressed as kindness. I find I can't stomach them anymore, not even the gentle ones. Nathaniel Harrington was silent for a long moment. He was a man to whom words came slowly and cost dearly, and Eleanor waited because she had learned that his silences were not empty, but full a man choosing among things he did not know how to say. "Because when you read," he said finally, "I understand for the first time in 11 years what my brother must have felt believing in something. You make a person want to believe you can win. I'd forgotten that was possible. I'd decided it was a boy's foolishness, and it killed him, and I'd have nothing to do with it." He turned his hat slowly in his hands. And then a spinster in a gray dress stepped forward in a ballroom and read a language no man there could read, and told a room full of powerful men exactly how they were being robbed. And I thought that's the thing I buried with my brother. She's dug it back up. He set the hat aside. "I don't want to protect you, Eleanor. You've made it plain you don't need it, and I've come to believe you. I want to stand near a person who makes me believe again. That's the true thing. Make of it what you will." Eleanor Whitmore, who always had an answer, who had spent a lifetime armoring herself in words, found for the second time in a week that she had none at all. And into that silence, before either of them could reach for something to fill it, Aunt Margaret's voice called down the stairs, sharp, alarmed, and utterly unaware of what she was interrupting. "Eleanor, there's a carriage in the road, a fine one, and a man getting out of it I've never seen in my life dressed like Baltimore money, and he's asking for you by name." Eleanor and Nathaniel looked at each other. "Thorne," Eleanor said softly, and she rose and smoothed her father's manuscripts closed and went to meet at her own front door the one man in this whole affair she had never yet laid eyes on, the hard lender from Baltimore, whose $11,000 had set the entire summer burning, and who had not, it seemed, come all this way to go home empty-handed. Marcus Thorne was not what Eleanor had built in her mind through a summer of dreading him. She had pictured a brute, the kind of hard case who'd held Barrow in a stable, and instead, a spare gray, unhurried man stood at her broken gate with his hat already in his hand, older than Edward by 20 years, with the flat, still eyes of a person who has counted a great deal of money and buried a great many illusions. "Miss Whitmore." He did not smile. "You'll be wondering why a Baltimore lender comes to a gray house on Willow Lane at supper time." "I'm wondering," Eleanor said, "whether you've come for your money or for revenge, and which of the two you imagine I can give you." "Neither." Thorne turned the hat in his hands. "I've come because I've been made a fool of, ma'am, and I've reached an age where I mind that more than I mind the money." He glanced past her to where Nathaniel had come to stand in the doorway. "Harrington, I know your name. Everyone in my line knows your name. May I come in? What I've got to say is short, but it's not a thing I care to say on a doorstep." Eleanor stepped back and let him pass, and she saw Nathaniel's hand settle near. Not on a weapon he carried, none in the house but ready. The way a careful man is always ready, and Thorne saw it too, and something almost like approval crossed his gray face. "You needn't guard her from me," Thorne said, lowering himself into the good chair, uninvited, as Nathaniel had done, as Nathaniel himself. "I've done enough business badly this summer without adding a foolishness like that to the list." He set his hat on his knee. $11,000. That's what Edward Aldermore owes me. I lent it 2 years past against his tobacco lands and his word, and I took his word for more than the lands were worth, which was my error, and I've come to unmake it. He looked at Eleanor. "This morning I had my men on the Baltimore road to bring Aldermore to me. I meant to squeeze him. Instead, your constable took him and one of my men, a fool I've since dismissed, spent the night helping Aldermore hold a clerk in a stable which I never sanctioned and which sickens me. I don't hold witnesses in stables, Miss Whitmore. I lend money. There's a difference whatever the county will now say of me." "Then you've come to distance yourself," Eleanor said, "from Edward, before his ruin splashes on your name." "I've come to do more than that." Thorne reached into his coat and drew out a folded paper and set it on the little table beside her father's manuscripts. "I've heard what happened in that courthouse. Word travels faster than a man on a blown horse. I heard a woman read 7 tongues and unmade a fraud that a room of clever men couldn't see. And I thought to myself, Marcus, there is a person who saw the truth of Edward Aldermore a full season before you did, and you a man who's prided himself 30 years on reading people better than they read themselves. He tapped the paper. That's Aldermore's note. His debt to me, $11,000. I'm signing it over. The room went very still. To whom? Eleanor said carefully. To you. Nathaniel moved half a step. Thorne. Hear me out, Harrington, before you decide I'm cruel or mad. Thorne held up a hand. I'll not collect $11,000 from a man in a cell. He hasn't got it and never will now. The debt's dead money to me. But it's not dead as a record. That note and the ledger I hear Miss Whitmore's been reading together, they prove where every stolen dollar went, mine included. A widow named Alton, a cheated merchant. Miss Whitmore's own father's work. I've been robbed, Miss Whitmore, same as they were robbed of my judgment, which at my age is the only thing I'd grieve to lose. So I'm giving you the note, not to collect, to use. You mean to give those people back what Aldermore took? You'll need standing to do it, and a debt in your name gives you standing no court will question. Consider it. For the first time, something moved at the corner of his mouth that might have been humor. Consider it a hard old man's apology to everyone he was too proud to see coming. Eleanor looked at the note for a long moment. You could keep it, she said. Sue his estate. Take his tobacco lands. Recover something. I could. And I'd get a pennies on the dollar and a reputation as the Baltimore vulture who picked a ruined man's bones. Or I could give it to the woman who saw clear when I saw blind, and be remembered by the widow Alton, by this whole watching county, as the one man in Aldermore's affairs who did the decent thing at the end. Thorne stood retrieving his hat. I've made money 30 years, Miss Whitmore. It's the only thing I was ever good at. I find at 60 that I'd like just once to be good at something else. He set the note down flat, squared it with one finger. There. It's yours. Do with it what you promised the magistrate. I'll sleep the better for it, and God knows a lender sleeps poorly. He was at the door before Eleanor found her voice. Mr. Thorne. He turned. Edward built his whole life on the belief that everyone is as hollow as he is, Eleanor said. That every man can be bought, every debt is a leash, every kindness a trade. You've just proven him wrong on your way out my door. I don't think you know how much that's worth. It's worth more than $11,000. Thorne looked at her a moment and inclined his head, the small grave courtesy of an old man who has been paid in a coin he didn't expect. Ma'am, he said, and he was gone. The county did not change overnight. Eleanor knew it wouldn't. She was too clear-eyed for that particular comfort. The same women who'd turned their backs in the churchyard did not suddenly become her friends, and the same men who'd called her bitter did not all at once call her brilliant. What changed was slower and truer than that. It was the widow Alton come to Willow Lane 3 weeks later, bent and disbelieving, holding the papers Eleanor had translated out of Edward's ledger, the proof that her late husband's fleet had been stolen by a forged clause, and weeping to learn that a court would hear her, that she might yet die with her name and her property restored. It was the cheated merchant. It was the third man in the ledger, and the fourth. One by one they came, the people Edward Aldermore had made small and kept small, and one by one Eleanor read them the truth in their own affairs, and set them on the road to reclaiming it. You've become a sort of court unto yourself, Constance observed on one of the many afternoons she now spent at Willow Lane, for she and Eleanor had become the kind of friends that neither had expected and both had needed. Half the county's wronged come to your parlor now instead of the magistrates. The magistrate's learning to be honest, Eleanor said. It's a slow business at his age. They come to me because I can read what Edward hid, and Edward hid everything. When the last of his ciphers is cracked, they'll go back to Pell, and Pell will do his duty, and I'll go back to being a woman with a strange gift and no particular use for it. She said it lightly, but Constance, who had grown to know her, heard the thing underneath. You're afraid of after, Constance said. Eleanor did not answer at once. When there was Edward to fight, she said finally, I knew exactly what I was for. Every hour had a shape. And now he's in a cell, and the ledger's nearly read, and the debt is repaid, and the wronged are being righted, and I find myself asking what a clever woman does with herself when the war is won. She looked at her father's manuscripts, still spread on the table, where they'd become a permanent fixture. My father left me a mind. I've finally used it for something. And I'm terrified that this was the one use, and after it, I go back to being a curiosity in a gray dress waiting at the edge of rooms. It was Barrow who gave her the answer, though he never knew it. The clerk had healed the arm, mended crooked but usable. The bruises faded, and he came to Willow Lane, not as a witness now, but as a free man, his testimony given his own small part in Edward's crimes, forgiven by a court that understood a man who fears for his children. He brought his eldest with him one afternoon, a girl of 11, sharp-eyed and quiet. And while Barrow spoke with Eleanor, the girl drifted to the table and stood looking at the manuscripts at the Latin and the French, with a hunger on her face that Eleanor knew in her own bones because she had worn it herself at that age. Can you read it? The girl asked before her father could hush her. I can, Eleanor said. Will you teach me? Barrow flushed and started to apologize. A clerk's daughter did not ask such things of her betters. But Eleanor lifted a hand and stopped him, and knelt down to the girl's level, and looked into that hungry, sharp, unafraid young face, and felt the whole shape of her after fall suddenly and completely into place. Yes, Eleanor said. I'll teach you, and not only you. She used the note. Not to collect it. She never collected $1 of Edward Aldermore's dead debt. She used it the way Thorne had meant her to, as standing as leverage, as the credit of a woman the county could no longer dismiss. And with Nathaniel not his charity, she'd have none of that but his investment. His name beside hers on the deed as a partner, and never an owner, she bought the old Aldermore estate itself, when it came up for sale out of his ruin. The grand house where a frightened man had once kept a clerk in a stable. The very rooms where he'd pretended to read the manuscripts he'd stolen. She made it a school. Not a finishing school, not a place to teach girls to be ornamental and quiet and marriageable. A real school, languages and mathematics and law and history, and the keeping of accounts for the daughters of the county who had minds and nowhere to put them. Barrow's girl was the first enrolled. The widow Alton's granddaughter was the second. Girls came from the canal camps, daughters of the very men who'd filled the courtroom benches, and Eleanor Whitmore, who had spent her whole life being told a woman's cleverness was a defect, stood in Edward Aldermore's stolen halls and taught girl after girl that it was the finest thing they'd ever own. He'd hate this, Constance said on the day the first classes met, watching the girls file into rooms that had once held Edward's silence. More than the cell, more than the ruin. This is the thing he'd hate most in all the world, his house full of clever girls. I know, Eleanor said. It's partly why I did it. I'm not a saint, Constance. There's revenge in me, same as anyone. I just found a way to take it that builds something instead of breaking it. Nathaniel found her that evening in what had been Edward's grand library, and was now the school's. The shelves that had held stolen manuscripts filled now with books meant to be read by everyone who wanted them. She was alone, moving among the shelves, and she did not hear him come in, and he stood a moment in the doorway watching her, the way he'd watched her from the first. The way a man watches a thing he has decided to trust and cannot quite believe he was granted. You've done it, he said. She turned. Everything you said that first night in the ballroom when you told me it wouldn't stay a matter of contracts, he said. You said Aldermore wanted control of the county, of every deal that would ever cross the water, and instead, he gestured at the shelves, the classrooms, the whole transformed house. Instead, you've got it. Not the way he wanted it, the opposite way. He wanted a county that owed him. You've made a county that owes you a debt it's glad to carry. I don't want to be owed, Eleanor said. That was his sickness. I've no wish to catch it. I know. That's the difference. It's always been the difference. Nathaniel crossed the library to her slowly and stopped a careful distance away, hat in his hands as ever. Eleanor, I've something to say, and I've been a long time working up to it, and I'll say it plain because you've told me you can't stomach half-truths, not even the gentle ones. Eleanor went very still. When I sat in your parlor that first morning, Nathaniel said, I told you I don't need a woman who makes my life easier. I told you I wasn't a trusting man that my brother trusted, and it killed him that I'd learned to see everything coming so I'd never be caught unready again. His voice was low and steady, and it cost him. She could see it cost him. And then you caught me unready every single day of this summer. You saw what I couldn't see. You said things no one had dared say to me in 11 years. You stood up in a ballroom and a churchyard and a courtroom, and you would not be made small, and I found that He stopped. Started again. I don't want to protect you. You don't need it, and I've stopped pretending you do. I don't want to own you. I've watched what owning does to a man, and I want none of it. The words came hard. I want to stand beside you, as your equal where I can, as the lesser where you're the greater, which is often, for as long as you'll have me near. That's the whole of it. That's the true thing. The library was silent. Eleanor Whitmore, who had been left at an altar, who had been called bitter and strange and too clever to be loved, who had spent 6 years believing that the one thing she was good for was the one thing no man would ever want, looked at Nathaniel Harrington across a room full of books meant for clever girls, and felt something in her chest that she had long ago decided was gone for good. I will never be someone's possession, she said. It was not a rejection. It was a condition, and he understood it as one. I know, he said. I'm not asking to possess you. I'm asking to be near a person who possesses herself. There's nothing rarer in this world. Eleanor and I spent 11 years too frightened to want anything at all. I'm done being frightened. You understand that I'll go on reading Edward's ledger and writing what he broke and running this school and being difficult and correcting your Latin, which is atrocious. My Latin is fine. Your Latin is a crime against Cicero, and I've been too kind to tell you. A laugh broke out of her, surprising them both, watery and real. You understand that I don't get smaller. Not for anyone. Not ever again. That whatever this is, I come into it my full size, or I don't come into it at all. I never wanted you smaller, Nathaniel said. I wanted you exactly your size. That's the whole reason I want you at all. And Eleanor Whitmore, who had walked forward once into a ballroom expecting to be laughed at, and instead had walked into the rest of her life, took the last step across the library, and closed the careful distance he'd left between them, and did not shrink, and was not asked to. They did not marry quickly, and when at last they did, it was as partners-in-law, and in fact her name kept whole beside his. The school hers, outright her father's manuscripts, hers forever. Edward Aldermore was tried in the autumn on the weight of his own ledger, and never walked free again, and the widow Alton got her fleet, and Pell became slowly and stubbornly an honest man, and Marcus Thorne wrote from Baltimore twice a year to ask after the school he'd unknowingly helped to build, and Barrow's daughter grew up to read 6 languages and teach them to others. And on summer evenings, years after, when the canal was long dug and the water ran clear, and the estate that had been built on cruelty rang instead with the voices of girls learning that their minds were not defects, but inheritances. Eleanor Whitmore would sometimes stand at the window of what had once been a thief's grand library, and remember the woman in a gray dress who had folded a letter into her glove and stepped forward into a room that did not want her. And she understood at last the thing her father had tried to tell her when she was 15 and grieving and afraid. A person's worth was never the world's to grant. It was never in the choosing or the leaving the altar, or the churchyard, the whispers, or the turned backs. It had always from the very first belonged to her alone, and the day she stopped waiting for the world to see, it was the day she became impossible to overlook.